What happens when the weight of ancestral vengeance falls on shoulders too young to bear it? An orphaned heir faces an impossible choice: complete the brutal revenge left undone by their predecessors, or risk everything to break the cycle of violence. Can anyone truly escape a legacy of blood, or are some destinies simply too powerful to resist? This is the story of the last descendant of Ironwood Hollow, and the choice that would either save them or damn them forever. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, where the mist clings to the valleys like old secrets, there once stood a place called Ironwood Hollow. The old-timers say you can still find it if you follow the creek bed past where the railroad tracks bend toward nowhere. But most folks don't go looking. Some stories are better left buried. Maya Ironwood was 17 when she inherited everything. Not money. Not land. Not the kind of inheritance you'd celebrate with lawyers and handshakes. No. Maya inherited a promise written in blood, carved into the bark of an ancient oak tree, and whispered through 5 generations of Ironwoods who died trying to fulfill it. The story began in 1892, when her great-great-great-grandfather, Elias Ironwood, was a prosperous timber merchant in these mountains. He'd built something beautiful here: a mill, a community, a future. He'd employed half the county, black and white, immigrant and native-born. In those days, that kind of equality made you either a saint or a target. Samuel Crane chose to make him a target. Crane was a railroad baron from back east, a man who saw mountains and saw only money. He wanted Elias's land for a rail line that would carve through the heart of Ironwood Hollow. When Elias refused to sell, Crane did what men like him always did in those days. He burned it all down. The mill. The homes. 23 people died in those flames, including Elias's wife and 3 of his children. Only his eldest son, Thomas, survived, pulled from the creek by workers who'd been downstream when the fires started. But here's what made it murder, not just tragedy. They found the accelerant. They found the paid men who'd set the fires. They even found witnesses who saw Crane giving the orders from his private train car parked on the mountain ridge, watching through a spyglass as the hollow burned. And when Thomas Ironwood brought all that evidence to the county sheriff, the sheriff was on Crane's payroll. When he went to the state court, the judge had been installed by Crane's political machine. When he went to the newspapers, they'd already been bought. That's when Thomas Ironwood carved his promise into that old oak tree, the only thing in the hollow the fire couldn't take. What law will not answer, blood must. Thomas spent 20 years tracking Samuel Crane. He became a different kind of man. Harder, colder, purpose replacing everything that made life worth living. He learned where Crane's vulnerabilities were. His business partners. His political connections. His family. But before Thomas could strike, Crane died. Natural causes. A heart attack in his sleep at 63, surrounded by his wealth and his grandchildren. Some men would have called that justice enough. Thomas Ironwood was not some men. The debt passes down, he carved beneath his original message. Blood for blood, generation for generation, until the scales balance. Thomas turned his vengeance toward Crane's empire instead. He taught his son, Marcus, everything he knew about the Crane family business, their secrets, their sins. And when Thomas died, some say of a broken heart, some say of poisoning by Crane associates who'd learned of his obsession, Marcus took up the burden. Marcus sabotaged Crane railway contracts. He exposed corruption that sent 3 Crane executives to prison. He married into a family that gave him access to banking records, and he used them to drain millions from Crane holdings. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. Marcus's daughter, Eleanor, continued the work. She became a lawyer. Ironic, given that the law had failed her great-grandfather. She filed lawsuit after lawsuit, tying up Crane assets for decades. She won some, lost more, but every victory felt hollow because the debt could never truly be paid. Eleanor's son, James, Maya's father, he'd taken it even further into darkness. James Ironwood didn't just want financial ruin for the Cranes. He wanted them to feel what Elias had felt. He wanted them to know loss. He'd been planning something for years. Maya had found the journals after he died, found the careful maps, the surveillance photos, the detailed plans that made her blood run cold. He'd been planning to burn down the Crane family estate during their annual reunion. 43 people would have been in that house. Children. Grandchildren. People who'd never heard of Elias Ironwood or a hollow that burned more than a century ago. But James Ironwood died before he could complete his revenge. A car accident on a mountain road, icy conditions, a sharp curve, no witnesses. And he left everything to Maya. Maya had grown up knowing the story, but she'd thought it was just that, a story. Family history, tragic but distant, the way all family histories are tragic if you look back far enough. She didn't know her father was still living it. Still dying for it. The lawyer who read the will explained it clinically. Property in Ironwood Hollow, some money in accounts, and a safety deposit box. The box's contents were for Maya's eyes only. Inside, she found everything. 5 generations of documentation. Journals. Plans. Evidence of crimes committed in the name of justice. Justice denied in the name of power. And a letter from her father. Maya, my light, my only good thing. I know what you're thinking. I know how this looks. But you have to understand, some debts transcend time. Some crimes are so monstrous that even death doesn't absolve them. The Cranes took everything from us. Not just lives, not just property, they took our right to justice. They proved that if you're powerful enough, you can burn children alive and face no consequences. I couldn't let that stand. Your grandmother couldn't. Your great-grandfather couldn't. And now, it falls to you. In this box, you'll find what I couldn't finish. The plans are complete. The preparations are made. All it needs is someone brave enough to light the match. The Crane family reunion is scheduled for June 15th. The same date they burned Ironwood Hollow. I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in justice. You're the last Ironwood, Maya. The last chance to balance the scales. I love you. I'm sorry this burden is yours. But it's ours, and it always has been. Finish what we started. Maya sat in her father's study for 3 days and 3 nights, reading everything. Learning everything. Understanding, for the first time, the weight her family had carried for 5 generations. She understood the anger. God, did she understand it? 23 people burned alive. Justice denied. The Crane family still wealthy, still powerful, still benefiting from the empire built on those ashes. But she also saw what the anger had done to her family. Thomas had died alone, consumed by hate. Marcus had destroyed his marriage, alienated his children, spent his life in pursuit of retribution that never satisfied. Eleanor had won legal victories that felt like ashes in her mouth because the dead stayed dead. James, her father, had planned mass murder and died before he could become a monster. 5 generations of Ironwoods had sacrificed everything. Love, happiness, peace, their very souls, on the altar of vengeance. And what had they accomplished? Some financial damage. Some legal victories. Some Cranes had suffered, yes, but new ones were always born. The family name continued. The empire continued. The injustice continued. The only thing that had truly been destroyed was the Ironwood family itself. Maya realized something her ancestors never had. Revenge doesn't balance scales. It just tips them in the other direction, starting a new cycle of debt and retribution. Her great-great-great-grandfather had been right that the law failed him. But his solution had failed too. 5 generations of failure, dressed up as righteous anger. She could continue it, continue the cycle, complete her father's plan, become what her ancestors had slowly morphed into. Or she could do what none of them had the strength to do. Let it end. Refuse the inheritance. Break the chain. But here's what made the choice unbearable. Among her father's papers, Maya found something he probably didn't mean for her to see. A private investigation report, dated just 3 months before his death. It revealed that Samuel Crane, the original railroad baron who'd ordered the burning of Ironwood Hollow, hadn't died of natural causes in 1912. He'd been poisoned by Thomas Ironwood. The cycles of revenge hadn't started with a denied justice. They'd started with a completed one. Thomas had gotten his revenge. He'd killed Samuel Crane and made it look natural. But instead of finding peace, he'd found that it wasn't enough. So he'd invented a new justification. The debt passes to the children. The empire must fall. The family must suffer as ours suffered. He'd succeeded in his revenge, and then he'd moved the goalposts. And every generation after had bought the lie, had believed the debt was still unpaid when it had been paid all along. Maya understood then that the revenge her family sought wasn't about justice. It had stopped being about justice the moment Thomas Ironwood's knife slipped into Samuel Crane's wine at that railroad gala in 1912. It was about pain-seeking company. It was about trauma that couldn't heal, finding reasons to stay wounded. It was about people so defined by their suffering that they couldn't imagine who they'd be without it. But there was something else in that investigation report. The current Crane family, the ones her father had planned to murder, had commissioned their own historical investigation 3 years ago. They'd discovered what Samuel Crane had done. They'd found the evidence Thomas Ironwood had collected. And they'd tried to find the Ironwood family to make amends. They'd wanted to acknowledge the crime. Offer reparations. Name what happened in Ironwood Hollow as the massacre it was, and fund a memorial to the 23 people who died. They'd sent letters, made calls, hired investigators. But James Ironwood had intercepted every attempt at contact. He'd hidden them from Maya, because reconciliation would mean giving up the revenge that had become his entire identity. The Cranes, these Cranes, the ones living now, wanted peace. And her father had been planning to burn their children alive for it. Maya stood at the old oak tree where it all began, where Thomas Ironwood had carved his promise in 1893. 5 generations of messages were carved there now, each one a promise of blood, a refusal to let go, a chain forged from pain. In her pocket, she carried 2 things. A burner phone with a single number programmed in, the contact her father had used to arrange the arson. 1 call, and the plan would activate. The Crane estate would burn on June 15th, just as Ironwood Hollow had burned. The cycle would complete. And a letter she'd written herself, to the Crane family. An introduction. An explanation. An acceptance of the peace they'd offered her father. She thought about Elias Ironwood, who'd built something beautiful in these mountains and watched it burn. A man who'd loved his community, who'd treated people fairly in an unfair time, who died trying to save his neighbors from the flames. Would he recognize what his descendants had become? Would he want this legacy of violence and obsession? Or would he weep to see how his son had twisted grief into something monstrous? Maya pulled out the knife she'd brought, the same knife Thomas Ironwood had used to kill Samuel Crane, passed down through the generations as a sacred relic. She raised it to the tree, ready to add her own message to the others. But what would she carve? The debt is paid. The chain is broken. Or would she carve the date, June 15th, a promise that the scales would finally balance in blood and fire? The wind moved through the hollow, carrying the scent of wild roses growing where the old mill had stood. New life from old ashes. The forest had reclaimed everything, turning tragedy into soil for beauty. Could people do the same? Could a family? Maya made her choice. She reached for one of the 2 items in her pocket, but before her fingers closed around either the phone or the letter, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Footsteps. Someone else was in Ironwood Hollow. Maya turned to see a figure emerging from the tree line. A woman, maybe in her 60s, with silver hair and eyes that held the weight of old sorrows. "You're Maya Ironwood," the woman said. Not a question. A statement. Maya's hand moved instinctively to the knife. "Who are you?" The woman stepped closer, and in the fading light, Maya could see the family resemblance she'd studied in all those photographs. The distinctive Crane features. "My name is Catherine Crane," the woman said softly. I'm Samuel Crane's great-great-granddaughter. And I've been waiting for you to come here. Maya's mind raced. How did she know? How long had she been watching? Was this a confrontation? A plea? Catherine's next words changed everything. I know what your father was planning. I know what's scheduled to happen tomorrow at the reunion. And I know you have the power to stop it, or to let it happen. She took another step forward. But there's something you need to know first. Something about your father's death. It wasn't an accident, Maya. And the person who killed him. Catherine's voice broke. Was me. So here we stand, at the edge of an impossible moment. Maya Ironwood, the last of her line, holding the power to continue a cycle of vengeance or to break it. But the cycle has already twisted in ways she never imagined. Catherine Crane, confessing to murder, perhaps in self-defense, perhaps in her own act of vengeance, perhaps for reasons we don't yet understand. This is the truth about inherited revenge. It never goes the way our ancestors planned. It never stays clean. It never remains simple. It mutates. It grows. It takes on a life of its own, pulling in the innocent, creating new victims, new debts, new cycles within cycles. A new dawn, or a perpetual twilight. When Maya Ironwood chose which item to pull from her pocket, the phone that would burn the Crane family alive, or the letter that would offer peace, she thought she was choosing between revenge and forgiveness. But Catherine Crane's confession revealed a harder truth. Sometimes the cycle has already made choices for us. Sometimes we're already implicated in violence we didn't choose. Sometimes the line between victim and perpetrator is written in blood too mixed to trace. True freedom versus the illusion of control gained through retribution. Maya thought she could control this moment. Choose clearly. Act decisively. But revenge is never clean. Justice is never simple. And the past is never really past. So I leave you with this question. What would you do if you inherited a legacy of unfinished revenge? Would you complete it, believing that some debts transcend time? Would you refuse it, breaking chains that bound your ancestors? Or would you discover, as Maya has, that the choice was never really yours to make? That you were born into a story already written, with an ending you can only partially control? The answer might matter less than you think. Because whether Maya Ironwood chooses revenge or peace, whether she calls that number or sends that letter, whether she forgives Catherine Crane or turns her in, the hollow remembers. The tree remembers. And some debts once created can never truly be erased, only transformed into new debts, new pain, new stories that future generations will have to make sense of. The legacy of Ironwood Hollow doesn't end with Maya's choice. It only enters its next chapter. What happens next? That's a story for another time. What do you think Maya should do? Should she trust Catherine Crane's confession, or is it another manipulation in this long game of revenge? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story made you think about the weight of family legacy and the cycles we inherit, hit that subscribe button, because there are more stories from the forgotten corners of America, where the past never really dies. See you in the next one.